Okay, let's set the scene. It's October 1943, high above the Eastern Front. Now, the war's still incredibly brutal, obviously, but for the Soviets, things are finally starting to turn their way.
Definitely. The feeling is shifting.
Right. And you've got Lieutenant Alexei Yegorov. He's up there, maybe 6,000 meters, strapped into his Yak-9 fighter. Solid plane, the workhorse of the Red Air Force.
On a really dependable aircraft, yeah. They were churning them out.
And he's feeling pretty good. Visibility's clear. And they're actually starting to gain real air superiority after, well, years of struggle.
Yeah, this is peak Soviet confidence time. It's right after Kursk, that huge victory. The Red Army's pushing west. Soviet pilots feel like they've finally got the measure of the Luftwaffe. They're winning with good machines, huge numbers, and tactics they've bled for.
But then, Yegorov spots something. A single German plane way below him. And it's moving, strangely, like impossibly fast.
Something's not right.
He pushes his Yak-9 full throttle, dives hard, trying to get close enough to even see what it is. But like within seconds, poof, it's gone.
Just vanishes.
Not like it runs away, just accelerates out of sight. So he lands, reports this untouchable German machine, faster than anything he's ever seen. And his bosses.
They basically tell him he's seeing things. Combat stress, misidentification, you know the drill.
Yeah. But Yegorov wasn't stressed, was he? He was one of the very first Soviet pilots to get a glimpse of the Messerschmitt Me 262, the Schwalbe, Swallow.
Nazi Germany's first operational jet fighter. I mean, think about that. It's literally a ghost from the future flying over this brutal, grinding war.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We want to go beyond just the stats and dates of the Me 262. We need to dig into that true, terrifying story of how Soviet pilots first encountered this thing. And maybe more importantly, why it created this, deep psychological fear.
A fear that threatened to make everything they knew, all their skills, maybe even their inevitable victory, completely obsolete, even while they were winning on the ground.
Exactly. And that 1943 context you mentioned is so key to understanding that terror. The Red Army's got the momentum. Their air force is built on these proven mass-produced planes. The Yak-9, the Lavochkin Lav-5, and the Il-2 Sturmovik, the flying tank.
Right, heavily armored gets the job done. Soviet doctrine was all about robustness, reliability, and just overwhelming numbers. Industry was key.
They figured, okay, maybe early on a German ace and a top fighter had an edge, technically, but sheer numbers and dependable planes would win out. And they're proving right.
But contrast that with the Luftwaffe in late 43, early 44. They're fighting this desperate war on two fronts, getting bled white.
Shortages of everything, right?
Yeah.
Experienced pilots, replacement planes, ammo.
And critically, fuel. Their conventional air power was basically collapsing under the strain, which makes the appearance of this secret weapon, the Me 262, even more jarring.
It's this massive paradox. The average German pilot is struggling with a worn-out Focke-Wulf, maybe, limited fuel, while this revolutionary jet is being built in secret.
Yeah, hidden away in forests, dispersed factories, totally off Allied recon radar. Soviet intelligence, they had absolutely no idea jet propulsion was about to hit the battlefield. Zero.
So those first sightings, like Yegorov's,
Yeah.
they were just dismissed as anomalies, ghosts.
Right. And the journey from those confused sightings to realizing this ghost was real and deadly, well, that's what we call the shock of the new.
It took almost a year for that confirmation to really land, didn't it? From Yegorov's 1943 glimpse to fall 1944.
Yeah, September 1944. And that's when Captain Ivan Kozhedub has his encounter near the German border. Now, Kozhedub wasn't just any pilot. She was already a legend.
Ended the war as the top Allied ace, 3 times hero of the Soviet Union.
Exactly. And he's flying the Lavochkin Lav-7, which at that moment was probably the best piston engine fighter the Soviets had. Fast, agile, peak Soviet design for the era. If anyone could catch a German plane.
It should have been Kozhedub in Lav-7. So what did he see?
He sees this silver dart, as he later called it, streaking across the sky. And the first thing he notices, no propeller.
Okay, that's weird enough. But he tries to chase it.
He does. Pours on the power, uses all his legendary skill. And his report afterwards, he was just completely stunned, baffled.
What did he say?
He said the thing accelerated away from his Lav-7 at full power, like he was standing still.
Wow, Kozhedub, standing still.
Imagine a master of energy fighting, just left behind, not by skill, but by sheer physics he couldn't comprehend. And he mentioned the sound, too. Not the usual pulse of a piston engine, but this continuous, terrifying roar.
Alien.
And intelligence. Still didn't buy it, even from their top ace.
It's fascinating, isn't it? The psychological block and aircraft without a propeller with that kind of speed. In 1944, that was pure theory. Stuff for labs maybe decades away.
So it had to be a mistake.
That was the official line. Maybe it was a new FW-190 variant, really streamlined, or maybe Kozhedub misjudged the speed, the distance, combat stress.
Yeah.
It was genuinely easier for them to doubt the sanity of their best pilot than to accept that aviation science had just taken this giant leap without them. Classic cognitive dissonance. Deny the evidence that shatters your worldview.
But reality has a way of asserting itself, and in this case, it asserted itself through losses. By late October 44, the reports weren't isolated anymore. Dozens of pilots were describing the same thing. Impossible speed, attacks coming out of nowhere, that distinct roar.
So the anecdotal evidence is piling up. When did it become undeniable tactical reality?
November 8th, 1944. That's the turning point. You have the standard Soviet formation operating near Berlin. 6 Il-2 Sturmovix, heavily escorted by 8 Yak-9s. Routine mission, high confidence.
Okay, sounds like a solid package. What happened?
The attack was anything but standard. The survivors reported being hit by 4 aircraft moving so fast they were practically blurs. The attackers made one single devastating pass with heavy cannon fire.
30-millimeter cannons, right? Much heavier than standard fighter armament.
Yeah, incredibly destructive. They hit hard, and then they were just gone. Vanished before the Yak escorts could even start a defensive break.
And the damage?
Brutal confirmation. 5 Sturmovix, 3 Yak fighters destroyed in less than 90 seconds.
90 seconds? That's unbelievable speed for engagement back then.
Totally unheard of. Piston engine dogfights could go on for minutes, sometimes longer. This was an ambush by lightning. After that incident, Soviet command had to accept it. This wasn't a ghost. It was a real devastating new weapon, and they had no idea how it worked or how to counter it.
So the losses are mounting, the fear is real, but they still don't understand how it's achieving this speed. They're fighting something they can't explain. How did they finally figure it out? Was it espionage? A defector handing over secrets?
Nope, nothing quite so dramatic. It was much more mundane, actually. It came down to finding the wreckage.
Ah, physical evidence.
Exactly. January 15th, 1945. Soviet troops are advancing through Poland, near Krakow, and they stumble upon a crashed German aircraft. Unlike previous encounters where maybe things just disintegrated, this one was relatively intact, enough to see what was going on.
And when the Soviet engineers got a look at it, what screamed revolution?
Well, first, the whole shape was different. Very sleek, smooth fuselage, almost like a dart. And the wings, they were slightly swept back. That was new. Designed to help with high-speed flight, dealing with compressibility effects near the sound barrier.
Okay, advanced aerodynamics. But the real giveaway?
The engines. Or rather, the lack of a propeller engine. Instead, under each wing, there were these 2 big cylindrical pods, these nacelles.
On inside those?
That's where they found it, the turbojet engine. And that discovery basically forced Soviet engineers to, throw out a huge chunk of their understanding of how planes fly.
Can you break down for us why this turbojet thing was such a game changer? Contrast it with the old piston engines.
Sure. So a traditional piston engine, like in a Yak or a Spitfire, it's basically like a car engine. It turns a crankshaft, which turns a propeller. The propeller bites into the air and pulls the plane forward.
Okay, makes sense.
But propellers have a fundamental limit. As the tips of the propeller blades spin faster and faster, they approach the speed of sound. When they get close to Mach 1, they create huge shock waves, massive drag, vibrations. The efficiency just collapses. It's a physical wall.
Right, the sound barrier isn't just for the plane, it's for the propeller too.
Exactly. The turbojet completely sidesteps that problem. It works on pure reaction. Think Newton's third law.
Equal and opposite reaction.
Precisely. The Junkers Jumo 004 engine in the Me 262 basically sucks in a massive amount of air at the front. Inside, rotating compressor blades squeeze that air down, making it dense and hot.
Okay.
Then fuel is spread into that compressed air and ignited. Boom! You get this controlled, continuous explosion happening inside the combustion chamber.
Like a furnace.
A very powerful one. And all those hot, expanding gases have only one way to go, out the back at incredibly high speed. That massive exhaust blast pushes the engine, and therefore the plane, forward. No propeller needed, just pure thrust.
And this difference in basic physics created that performance gap that caused so much panic. Let's just hammer home those numbers again, because they really are mind-blowing for the time.
You really are. The Me 262's top speed. Around 870 kilometers per hour. That's about 540 miles per hour.
Okay, fast. Now compare that to the best the Soviets had.
Their top fighter, the last 7, maxed out around 680 kilometers per hour. The Yak-9, the workhorse, maybe 600. Even the best Allied fighters, like the later Spitfires or Mustangs, were topping out around 650, 700 kilometers.
So the Me-262 wasn't just a little faster. It was almost 200 kilometers per hour faster than anything the Soviets, or the Allies for that matter, could put in the air.
Nearly a 30% speed advantage, plus superior climb rate, better performance at high altitude. It wasn't just an incremental improvement, it was a generational leap, like you said earlier, comparing cavalry to a sports car.
And this huge technological gap, discovered suddenly through wreckage. That explains Stalin's reported reaction when he finally got the full technical briefing.
Absolutely. The story, possibly apocryphal, but it rings true, is that his reaction was just one stunned word: how?
How? Yeah.
How did we miss this? How did they achieve this? How could our intelligence be so blind? That one word sums up the shock, the intelligence failure, the realization of technological backwardness, and the sudden fear that even with victory on the ground seeming inevitable, they might be facing a devastating new threat in the air. It instantly turned from a tactical puzzle into a national existential technology crisis.
Okay, so we've got the technical specs, the sheer speed differential, but let's bridge that gap to the human element again.
Yeah.
Why was this thing so terrifying beyond just being faster and hitting harder? The Soviets had faced tough German planes before, like the FW-190. They learned, adapted, used numbers. Why did the Me-262 feel different? Why did it, as you said, break the rules?
Because it completely changed the geometry of air combat. You know, traditional dogfighting, even the high-speed boom and zoom tactics, it's all about managing energy, trading altitude for speed, speed for turning ability. A good Yak pilot knew instinctively how his plane would behave, how much energy he needed for a maneuver, how to counter his opponent.
It was like aerial chess, in a way.
Right.
High stakes, but with known rules.
Exactly. The Me-262 just threw the chessboard out the window. If you tried a classic dive on it, a boom and zoom, expecting your speed advantage to carry you through, the Me-262 pilot could often just firewall the throttles and leave you hanging there. Or worse, use his superior acceleration to instantly turn the tables on you.
So all the established tactics were suddenly unreliable or even suicidal.
Pretty much. Remember Lieutenant Yegorov, the pilot who saw it back in '43? He wrote in his memoirs much later, in 1962, something really chilling. He said, "When you face a Me-262, all your training becomes worthless."
Wow.
Worthless. Imagine hearing that. Years of combat, thousands of flight hours. Irrelevant. It reduced combat from this intricate dance of skill and energy management to, well, basically luck. Your only real tactic was either to hug the ground, hoping the jet pilot wouldn't risk following you down into the weeds, or just pray they didn't spot you in the first place. There was no real engagement possible for most pilots, only avoidance.
Which leads perfectly into what Captain Sergei Kramarenko said. He talked about a deeper fear, didn't he? Something beyond just getting shot down.
He did. He called it the feeling of obsolescence. That's the core psychological terror. It wasn't just fear of a superior weapon. It was the dawning realization that your weapon, the plane you trusted, the plane your entire Air Force was built around, was suddenly outdated, a relic.
That's profound. Kramarenko actually described feeling like he was flying a museum piece against the future. Skill, experience, none of it seemed to matter against that raw technological leap.
Right. The Me-262 didn't just threaten pilots, it threatened the very idea of the propeller fighter as a frontline weapon, and those Soviet pilots felt that deep down personally.
And that personal feeling of helplessness, of being obsolete, that must have instantly rippled upwards into strategic fear for the Soviet command.
Oh, absolutely. They knew they were winning the ground war by late '44, early '45. Berlin was in sight. Victory seemed inevitable. But then this jet appears, and the terrifying question arises, what if?
What if Germany somehow fixes its production problems, gets enough fuel, trains enough pilots, and starts churning these things out in large numbers?
Exactly. Could they lose the air war even while winning the land war? Could these jets suddenly sweep the skies clear, attack the advancing Soviet columns, hit supply lines, bomb cities with near impunity because nothing could effectively intercept them high up?
That's the nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
That the hard-won victory on the ground could be snatched away, or at least made infinitely more costly, by this technological surprise they simply couldn't match at that moment.
That specific fear, the fear of mass-produced jets negating their ground gains, absolutely haunted Soviet military thinking in the final months of the war.
And that strategic fear, well, maybe exaggerated by the shock, wasn't entirely unfounded given the jet's actual performance when it did fight, but, and it's the big but, We have to balance that terror against the messy reality of Germany's situation in 1944-45.
Definitely. We need to look at the Me-262's effectiveness on paper versus its effectiveness in reality. Because on paper, yeah, it was horrifyingly good.
It only really started seeing service in July 1944, right? Which was already incredibly late in the war. And part of that delay was down to, well, Hitler.
Ah, yes. The classic example of strategic meddling from the top. The Me-262 was conceived by its designers, like Willy Messerschmitt, as a pure interceptor, a fighter killer, the perfect weapon, they thought, to slash through Allied bomber formation.
Sent speed is life for an interceptor.
But Hitler, fixated on offensive weapons and revenge bombings, initially insisted it be developed primarily as a Schnellbomber, a fast bomber, the A-2A fighter bomber version.
Which was not its best role.
Not at all. It forced design compromises, delayed the crucial fighter variant, and wasted precious time and resources tasking these advanced jets with tactical bombing missions they weren't optimized for. Even when that decision was finally reversed, the damage was done. The fighter force never reached the numbers it could have.
But even with that late start and limited numbers, the combat results were pretty stark. What were the rough figures again?
Total production was around 1,430 airframes, but maybe only 800 or so actually saw combat service due to training, damage, lack of fuel, etc.
Okay, so fewer than 1,000 operational jets scattered across different units.
Right, but those jets are credited with somewhere between 300 and 500 confirmed Allied and Soviet aircraft kills, while losing only about 100 Me-262s in air-to-air combat themselves.
So that's a kill ratio of potentially 5 to 1, maybe even higher, up to 10 to 1 in some accounts. That's devastating.
It absolutely proves that in the right hands, with the element of surprise and that speed advantage, the jet was incredibly lethal. But that operational dominance was constantly undermined by the plane's own flaws and the absolute chaos of the collapsing Third Reich.
It wasn't just delayed, it was also fundamentally an experimental machine pushed into service too early, wasn't it? A maintenance headache.
Nightmare is the word often used, those early Jumo 0004 jet engines. Revolutionary, yes, but unbelievably fragile.
You mentioned the lifespan earlier, 10 to 25 hours.
Yeah, think about that. A pilot flies maybe 3 or 4 long sorties, and the entire engine might need to be pulled and replaced. That put an impossible strain on ground crews, spare parts, everything.
And why were they so fragile? It wasn't just rushed production.
It fundamentally came down to material science. Metallurgy. Inside that engine, you have turbine blades spinning incredibly fast, like 10,000 RPM bathed in superheated gas.
Okay, extreme stress.
Extreme. Standard steel just couldn't handle it. It would soften, stretch, or even melt. The German engineers knew they needed special alloys, things rich in nickel, chromium, cobalt metals that resist high temperatures.
But those were strategic materials, hard to get with Allied bombing and blockades.
Exactly. So they had to improvise, using less ideal materials or designing complex internal air cooling channels within the blades themselves. It was ingenious, but the result was engines that were always operating right on the edge of catastrophic failure. Turbine blades stretching and failing was a constant problem.
And it wasn't just the engines breaking down. They were tricky to fly, too.
Very. Pilots needed specific training because the Jumo 004 was incredibly sensitive to how you handled the throttle.
Couldn't just slam it forward like at a piston fighter.
Absolutely not. Do it too fast or too abruptly, especially during maneuvers, and you could disrupt the airflow into the compressor stages. That could cause the combustion to cut out a flame out, or worse, lead to a surge of fuel and heat, causing the engine to literally explode.
So pilots were fighting the plane as much as the enemy.
In many cases, yes. A significant number of Me-262 losses weren't to enemy fire, but to accidents, engine failures on takeoff, landing gear collapses, handling mishaps.
And then overlaying all these technical problems was the broader context of Germany in early 1945.
The fuel crisis, it was crippling. These jets didn't run on standard aviation gasoline. They needed a specific synthetic kerosene-like fuel, often called J2. Production of all synthetic fuels was a top priority for Allied bombers.
So even if you had a working jet, a trained pilot, and an airfield, you might not have the gas to fly it.
Precisely. Squadrons were frequently grounded simply for lack of fuel. The jets became sitting ducks on their own airfields.
So this combination, the maintenance nightmare, the tricky handling, the fuel shortages, created a chink in the armor, a vulnerability that enemy pilots could exploit.
A critical one. If you couldn't reliably dogfight the Me-262 at altitude, where could you attack it?
When it was most vulnerable. Slow, low, and predictable.
takeoff and landing. During approach, the jet had to be slow, gear down, flaps extended. The engines weren't at peak efficiency or responsiveness at those low speeds. They were more vulnerable to flame out.
Which led to this really dangerous countertactic from Soviet and Allied pilots, basically loitering near known jet bases.
Yeah, airfield interdiction. They'd patrol, wait for the jets to come home, low on fuel, committed to their landing pattern, and then dive on them. It was incredibly risky. Those jet bases were usually heavily defended with flat guns and conventional fighter cover.
But they did it anyway, which really speaks volumes about the fear this jet inspired. You'd rather risk attacking a flak trap than let that jet get back up to altitude where it was untouchable.
Exactly. The famous story is American ace Chuck Yeager getting his first jet kill this way, catching a Me-262 landing. But Soviet pilots were employing the exact same desperate tactic on the Eastern Front. It showed a universal understanding. Hit them when they're down low and slow.
So the war ends just as the Me-262 is really starting to show its potential, but also its flaws. But the technological cat is out of the bag, and Act 5 really becomes about the race for that technology. Stalin sees those stats, hears about the potential. What's the immediate priority?
Number one priority for Soviet intelligence and advancing forces. Capture intact Me-262s. Capture blueprints, technical documents, engine parts, everything. And capture the German engineers and scientists who knew how they worked.
So it becomes this mad scramble across collapsing Germany in early
A
1945.
frantic race, yeah. You had Soviet trophy brigades or technical intelligence teams basically following right behind the frontline troops. They were trying to secure factories, research labs, airfields before the Germans could destroy everything.
And they were also essentially racing the Western Allies who were doing the exact same thing from the other direction, right?
Yeah.
Operation Paperclip and similar initiatives.
Absolutely. Everyone knew this jet technology was the future. The Soviets scored a major coup, though. April 20th, 1945, ironically, Hitler's last birthday, Soviet forces overran a key airfield, possibly near Oranienburg or Rechlin, though sources differ. They captured not just one, but 3 potentially repairable Me-262s.
3 intact jets. And maybe more importantly.
Critically, they also captured a huge trove of technical documentation. Blueprints, stress calculations, wind tunnel test results, engine manuals, gold dust for the engineers back in Moscow.
So this material gets whisked back east. What happens then? How did they dissect this German marvel?
It was months of intense work. Centralized design bureaus like CES-AGI, the Central Aerohydrodynamic Institute, got everything. They disassembled the planes piece by piece, x-rayed components, analyzed metal alloys.
And they talked to the Germans they captured.
Oh, yeah. Debriefings were crucial. Some German engineers were willing collaborators, seeing it as a way to continue their work. Others were less willing, let's say. But the Soviets squeezed every bit of information they could out of them.
And from all this analysis, what was the big takeaway for Soviet engineers? What was the hardest part to replicate?
They quickly realized the Germans' genius was often in dealing with scarcity. The biggest hurdle wasn't just copying the aerodynamic shape or the compressor design, it was the materials.
Back to those heat-resistant alloys for the turbine blades.
Exactly. Those Jumo 004 engines needed materials rich in nickel, chromium, molybdenum stuff the Soviets also struggled to produce in the required quality and quantity at that time. Germany, lacking direct access, had developed clever workarounds. Complex alloys using more available metals, intricate internal cooling passages inside the turbine blades themselves.
Stuff that was hard to figure out just by looking at it.
Very hard to reverse engineer quickly. When the Soviets tried to build their own copies of the Jumo 004, which became the RD-10 engine, they immediately ran into the same problems the Germans had. Turbine blades failing prematurely because their metallurgy wasn't quite there yet.
What else did they learn, beyond just the engine materials?
The importance of incredible precision in manufacturing, especially for the aerodynamics, the shape of the air intakes, the smoothness of the engine cowling. Tiny imperfections could create turbulent airflow into the engine.
Which could lead to
flameouts, especially at high angles of attack or when the pilot was adjusting the throttle. It reinforced the lesson that jet flight demanded a whole new level of manufacturing quality control compared to the more forgiving piston engine fighters they were used to mass producing.
So the overall conclusion from Moscow, looking at these captured jets and documents, was pretty stark.
Undeniable. The propeller era was over for high-performance fighters. The jet age had arrived, courtesy of Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union was behind. They needed to catch up fast, and the Me-262, flaws and all, was going to be their roadmap.
And that realization, driven by the captured Me-262s, lit a fire under the Soviet aviation industry, didn't it?
A massive fire. Stalin demanded results, resources were poured in. New design bureaus focused purely on jets sprang up almost overnight, or existing ones were massively expanded, and they began leveraging that captured German tech immediately.
Okay, so let's trace that lineage. How directly did the Me-262 influence the first generation of Soviet jets?
Very directly. Look at the first operational Soviet jet fighter, the Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-9. It first flew in early 1946. What powered it? Two RD-20 engines.
And the RD-20 was?
Essentially, a Soviet-built copy of the German BMW 003 axial flow turbojet, another engine design captured alongside the Jumo 004s. The whole layout of the MiG-9, with the engines slung under the fuselage, owes a lot to early German concepts.
Also in 1946, there was another early jet, the Yak-15, right? That one looked kind of familiar.
Yeah, the Yak-15 was a really clever, pragmatic stopgap. Yakovlev's design bureau basically took the proven airframe of their successful Yak-3 piston fighter and mounted a captured German jet engine, a Jumo 004 copy, the RD-10 in the nose where the piston engine used to be.
So a jet engine bolted onto a propeller plane body. Sounds interesting.
It was a bit odd-looking, with the exhaust under the fuselage, but it worked. It wasn't a world-beating fighter, but it was a quick way to get something jet-powered into the hands of pilots, get them used to the different handling, the higher landing speeds. It got the Soviet Air Force into the jet age practically overnight.
But these were early days, copies of German tech. The real game changer, the plane that truly showed the Me-262's legacy had been fully absorbed and surpassed, came a bit later.
That would be the MiG-15, first flight in 1947. This aircraft wasn't just copying, it was synthesizing. It incorporated key aerodynamic lessons from late-war German research that the Me-262 itself only hinted at.
Specifically, the swept wings.
Exactly. Aggressively swept wings based partly on German research data captured in 1945, like designs for the Focke-Wulf Ta-183 project. This was crucial for efficiently pushing towards and beyond the sound barrier.
But the MiG-15 had another crucial advantage, didn't it? It solved that engine reliability problem that plagued the early copies.
It did, and this is where the story takes a fascinating and politically awkward turn. The Soviets were still struggling to perfect the metallurgy and manufacturing for reliable, high-thrust jet engines based on the complex German axial flow designs.
So where did they get a better engine?
From, of all places, Great Britain.
Britain. But this is the start of the Cold War. Weren't they rivals?
Intense rivals. But in a move that still baffles historians, the post-war British Labour government under Clement Attlee decided in 1946 to sell the Soviet Union a number of advanced Rolls-Royce Knee centrifugal flow jet engines.
They sold them their best jet engine tech. Why?
The official reasoning was complex, maybe a gesture of goodwill, maybe underestimating Soviet capabilities. Some in Britain argued the Soviets were decades away from being able to replicate the Knee's advanced materials and precision manufacturing.
That sounds like a major miscalculation.
Catastrophic from a Western perspective. Stalin himself was reportedly amazed, supposedly asking if they'd sell the secrets to the atomic bomb next. The Nen was simpler, more robust, and more powerful than the German designs the Soviets were struggling with.
And the Soviets.
They didn't take decades. Soviet engineers, masters of reverse engineering when pushed, had the Nena perfectly copied within about a year. It became the Klimov RD-35 engine.
And that engine powered the MiG-15.
Yes, that reliable, powerful, British-designed, Soviet-copied engine combined with the German-inspired swept-wing aerodynamics. That was the MiG-15. A world-class fighter ready for combat by 1950.
Which brings us straight to the Korean War.
Exactly. American pilots initially flying early jets like the F-80 Shooting Star or the F-84 Thunderjet thought they owned the skies. Then, late in 1950, the MiG-15 shows up over the Yalu River, MiG Alley.
That is a shock.
A massive shock. The MiG-15 could outclimb, outturn at altitude, and was often faster than the early American jets. It took the arrival of the F-86 Sabre, itself incorporating captured German swept-wing data, to even the odds.
So Korea becomes the first major war fought largely between jet fighters. Fighters whose lineage traces directly back to the innovations forced by the Me-262.
Absolutely. It proved that the future Yegorov glimpsed in 43, where speed and altitude performance were king, was now the brutal reality. The Me-262 might not have won WWII, but it absolutely dictated the terms of the aerial Cold War that followed.
Which really cements its historical significance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe not the most effective aircraft of the war in terms of numbers, but arguably the most influential.
You can make a very strong case for that. Not for its own combat record, which was hampered by circumstance, but because it proved jet propulsion worked on the battlefield. It showed that a leap in speed and climb could potentially overcome numbers. And it basically forced every major air power to scrap their propeller fighter plans and race into the jet age. Every modern fighter owes something to the lessons learned from and driven by the Me-262.
It's a fascinating legacy. And as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels right to circle back to the pilots, the ones who actually faced this thing. After the war, when they could speak more freely, what did they say?
Their reflections are incredibly telling. Marshal Alexander Pokryshkin, the #2 Soviet ace, wrote in his memoirs in 1970 something very revealing. He said he was never really afraid of the Luftwaffe, even when badly outnumbered, confident in his skill, his plane, his tactics. But the Me-262, that was different. He called it the only German aircraft that truly frightened him.
And it wasn't just fear of being shot down, right? It was that deeper thing.
Exactly. Pokryshkin specifically linked it to that feeling of obsolescence. The fear wasn't just death. It was the fear that his hard-won mastery, everything he knew, was suddenly irrelevant against this new physics of aerial warfare.
That feeling really stuck with them. You mentioned Yegorov earlier, the first witness.
Yeah, there's an anecdote where late in life, in the 1980s, he was asked about the single worst moment of the entire war for him. People expected him to talk about Stalingrad, Kursk, some huge battle.
But he didn't.
No. He said, "It was seeing that Me-262 for the first time and realizing I couldn't catch it, couldn't fight it, couldn't do anything but hope it didn't see me." He talked about that feeling of complete helplessness still being crystal clear 40 years later.
Wow. And even Kozhedub, the top ace, the legend.
Even Kozhedub, reflecting back in 1985, acknowledged the potential. He said, quite frankly, that if the Me-262 had appeared just 1 year earlier, say, mid-1943 instead of mid-1944, and if it had been available in large numbers with enough fuel and trained pilots, the air war would have been very different.
So the terror wasn't just the few hundred jets they actually faced, but the potential they represented, the fear of what could have been if Germany hadn't been collapsing internally.
Precisely. The Me-262 itself was quickly surpassed. Within 5 years, jets like the MiG-15 and the Sabre made it look obsolete. But its real legacy, its historical punch, is that it remains this stark proof. Technological surprise can change the fundamental rules of war overnight, regardless of who seems to be winning on the ground.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought to chew on. We've seen the Me-262's incredible potential was ultimately hobbled by Germany's logistical collapse, lack of critical metals, lack of specialized fuel, Hitler's meddling, rushed development. So here's a question. If those things hadn't been factors, if Germany had managed its resources better, avoided the strategic blunders and deployed the Me-262 earlier and in force, would that psychological terror the Soviet pilots felt have become a devastating strategic reality? Could it have genuinely changed the air war's outcome, even at that late stage? And what does that tell us about the balance between groundbreaking innovation and the sheer grinding power of industrial capacity and logistics in modern warfare? Something to think about.